الآن يمكنكم المشاركة في مبادرة الأيام الرقمية تحت شعار انطلق بقوة مع جوجل، والتي يتناول فيها خبراء جوجل عناوين جديدة أسبوعيا مثل السحابيات، مهارات من جوجل، أندرويد، فلتر، ذكاء الآلة، فايربيس، ديزاين ثينكينج، مقسمة إلى دورات وورشات عمل يومية بالإضافة إلى مسابقات أسبوعية. شاهد الأيام الرقمية مباشرة على اليوتيوب وشارك رأيك وأسئلتك مع خبراء جوجل، واحصل على شهادة حضور في كل محاضرة تشترك فيها. هذا وأكثر من الأحد إلى الخميس ابتداء من الساعة 9 بتوقيت دبي عبر الرابط المبين youtube.com/gdgmena.
Hello everyone.
Hello.
So thank you for attending today's session. And so today we're having a machine learning session, and more specifically, it's a panel with these amazing people here. So the questions I will be asking will be actually in English, but the answers can be in any language. So please, our dear guests, feel free to answer the language that suits you most. So before I get started, let me introduce myself. So my name is Talate. I am part of GDG, Casablanca, and El Jadida team. And today I will be your host. So without further ado, I will let our guests introduce themselves. Norshan, would you like to get started?
Yes, thank you, Sarah, for this invitation. So I'm Norshan Fershishi. I'm actually from Tunisia, North Africa, and I'm a research engineer in natural language processing mainly, and in InstaDeep, which is a Tunisian startup. And I mainly work and focus on low-resourced languages such as Arabic and North African dialect. And I'm also a Google developer expert in machine learning.
That's amazing. Amin?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Amin Tajer. I currently manage an AI business specifically in NLP in Bahrain that goes by the name of Infiniteware. We've worked with clients such as Saudi Aramco, a couple of telcos here in Bahrain, Ministry of Interior, a couple more as well. I'm currently a GDE as well in ML, and pretty happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
That's amazing. Thank you. Mohammed?
Hello everyone. So my name is Mohammed Abu Alai. I am a data scientist. I work a lot with data and build real intensive data modeling. So I'm currently a Google developer expert in machine learning, of course, and I'm happy to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Norshan, Amin, and Mohammed, for being here with us today. It's a great pleasure to have you. So let me get started with my first question then. So I think like mostly in my talk that I did so far, everyone always asks me, how did you get started into machine learning? And I would like to ask that question to you back as well.
So maybe ladies first.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Amy. So
Sure.
I started machine learning from my studies. I actually studied engineering in applied mathematics, and in my last studies, I focused on data sciences. I specialized in there, and I got my first internship project at InstaDeep, which was a 6-month training. I had like a project about natural language processing for modeling the Tunisian dialect, and from there I started working at this startup and get more involved in real project and that focuses on solving real world problems. And from there I started having few workshops and conferences in order to get more involved in this amazing community.
That's great. I mean, like going through it from school already is a huge plus. So who would like to go next? Amin, Mohammed?
Maybe youth first now.
I mean, you can go if you want.
Okay, no worries. So we actually used to. So I was managing a game business before, game development business specifically. It was called Engine Technologies. I used to do a lot of game development when I was actually in university and directly after I graduated. So I was actually very focused on the AI aspect of building games. And when you're working with games, you don't normally deal with deep learning and machine learning, all these things. You normally work with, FSMs or finite state machines. And I picked up a lot of stuff in the area of evolutionary programming. I like the idea of optimization using, let's say scenarios and tricks that tries to mimic whatever evolution has come up with. And so after that, I actually had this interest to really get my hands dirty with the whole idea of neural networks. I heard a lot about neural networks. I heard how cool they were, but I wanted to understand what the hype was really all about. And so when I got my hands dirty, we actually switched and rebranded the business to InfiniteWare, and that was actually maybe in 2015 or 14. And it was pretty cool. We never really anticipated that we can work with different projects outside of the gaming world. So we work also with simulations. So with Saudi Aramco, for example, they do a lot of simulations where they can counter, safety issues that they have on site and all these things. But big fan of the science behind it, and I still feel that there's a lot of headroom for it to really, flourish.
Definitely, there's always room to improve something. Mohammed?
Okay, so I started since 2017, maybe, when I used to have I was a computer engineer, so my background is all about hardware, Arduino, Raspberry Pi, and all these hardware technologies. So the whole story started with a robot called Cosmo. It's a small robot where you can program it. I think Amin have it, so yes. Yes, so it started with the Cosmo. It's just a simple robot. You can learn Python on it, you can program Python on it, and see how the mechanics of Cosmo. I was interested a lot in what Cosmo is doing behind the scenes. It was very simple introduction, but I know there is deep things that Cosmo teams was building. So it started with the neural networks and go down deep into the rabbit hole of the neural networks.
That's great. That's great. I mean, all of your journeys are quite amazing. So, I mean, if you now you're at a higher level, you know more things than you knew when you started. So, if you were to go back and advise yourself on how to start back up again, would you change anything in the process?
In my humble opinion,
question. You can go, Amir.
Okay. Okay. So I was thinking maybe about the applications. I feel that a lot of people, when they get interested, in machine learning, they tend to go directly into the theory. They want to understand how those algorithms work and everything. But one of the talks that I've seen maybe in the last year or so was by this lady, the amazing lady Cassie Kuzarnikov, I believe. And she has this really great talk on YouTube, and I think it's a very long talk. However, what she really emphasizes on is the idea of building something practical and then going into the actual roots of understanding how things really work deep level. Because what we currently lack is building great products on top of machine learning, not understanding how the algorithms work. And so I think I've in the first couple of years, I really spent a lot of time understanding how models work. And I'm not saying that they're not really that fruitful. On the contrary, understanding how gradient descent, how it works, how those small mathematical details really iron out is really fantastic and gives you a lot of confidence when it comes to understanding how your model should really perform. But nonetheless, I'm more of a practical person. I would have loved to have things working in the very beginning instead of just saying, oh, okay, so here's a sum and then here's a sigma. Okay, this should make sense maybe in the next 2 years.
I think it's the challenge between the engineer and the scientist. The scientist want to understand everything from ground up, and the engineer, he's very practical.
Oh, and when you're bugged, it's a real hell.
100%, yes.
Yes.
I mean, I combine both of I have both of those approaches. I am an engineer, but then I love research more than engineering. And then I end up in the first place trying to learn everything. And then when the deadline comes, I just act like an engineer.
I mean, you have to be practical sometimes, especially if you're running a business, if you're driven by commercial requirements. And I think, I believe Norshin also has the same situation, since InstaDeep has been all over the news now with Kareem. And I mean, I'm sure there's a tremendous pressure on you guys to finish stuff on time.
Absolutely, yeah.
That smirk tells it all, huh?
Okay, so I got it. We should start with half-half. Like, we can learn a little bit about how to work through machine learning, the theory, and then we need to apply as we go. I think that's a good approach. Breaking things up, learning, and then going back to.
If you're an engineer, I mean, I'm sure AI researchers will have a different opinion, of course.
Yes, of
Agreed.
course.
Agreed.
I think everybody's different, but if I would start again from myself, يعني, I would tinker a lot and build more projects along the way. يعني, when we used to have fear of machine learning and artificial intelligence. I used to, whenever I hear machine learning, I'm just like, it's really difficult bubble, whereas يعني complex different stuff happening all at the same time, and I was afraid of the word machine learning, to be honest. I used to use statistics as a word instead of machine learning, so it's just,
I mean, it's all blurry.
يعني,
I mean,
it's all yes, it's all blurry, but don't be afraid. يعني, I would tinker a lot and build more models along the way.
I think the thing that is still scaring me for myself is the reinforcement learning part, because I haven't studied it yet. So I'm like, always when I see it, I get scared.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different kind of challenge, and I'm sure also InstaDeep has their own projects. But if you're coming with this background of supervised learning, things are very stereotypical, let's say. There's a pipeline that is defined and you know where to go. Reinforcement learning is more, more hands-on. And I think I think for me, it's more crazy. The thing that really gets me interested in it, because I find a lot of use cases for it in the game development space. And this is why I'm really excited about it as well.
Okay, then seeing as we have, mentioned these job things, Notion, would you like to say something before I?
Yeah. So for my side, I think that it's I started learning about generalities about machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I think it's a good idea to start from there to know a little bit of everything. But at a certain point, I think that someone need to focus on a specific field. I mean, there is the automatic speech recognition, the natural language processing, the computer vision, and no matter what you learn, you need to take few months or few years or however it will take you to focus on this field, because each field has its large knowledge to understand papers daily to read, and maybe problems even to solve. So I would say it would be great to focus on something to be the expert on this specific field, while having a background on different others.
I mean, 100%. Like a personal story of mine as well is when I got myself into NLP, I thought it's going to be a very easy job. Silly of me, of course. And so the more you get inside, it's like, oh, crap. So language is apparently crazy. It's not so easy, understanding how to dissect language. And I feel that compilers and NLP and machine learning share a lot of, common stuff.
I think if you understand NLP very well, or if you understand the language very well, you will understand the mind. It's really complex. It is really complex.
Yes,
I agree with you, I mean.
I mean, the whole deep learning thing has been inspired by the brain, so it's not really surprising. If we understand the brain, we can understand deep learning. For instance, if we understand deep learning better, we can get closer to understanding how our mind works, which is amazing, honestly. So my next question is more about the projects, as you mentioned them. So, usually when we apply to jobs, they actually always want to look at your resume, the projects that you have done. So what kind of advice would you give to people who just, got started, they just understood what machine learning is, okay? They did, the typical Kaggle M&East and then and then the usual competitions, and they won't like to work on a real project that can get them into some kind of position that is related to machine learning. Like, how should they choose their project? Like what kind of questions should they ask themselves?
Who wants to go first?
You can go. I mean,
Okay, I think Mohammed just skipped now. That Mohammed is hiding himself. Maybe you want to be the last in the batch. But yeah, okay. So in my humble opinion, what really matters most for businesses is that even though you're really good at one specific area, I mean, specialty is really a pretty big deal, but you also want to have a sort of overview of what happens in the whole picture. And so this is the ultimate debate between being a specialist versus being a generalist. But in the machine learning space, having a portfolio, having a set of projects that you worked on, maybe tackling the whole pipeline from actually, getting the data, showcasing how you solicited the data, how to actually clean it, which is trivial if you really you have hands-on with Python. But really, what really matters for me is when you take the whole pipeline and you finish the whole thing into deployment, because even deployment has its own specificities. So if you're going to deploy on, let's say, an Android device, it's completely different if you're going to, deploy maybe to the cloud, let's say, or maybe an Arduino, which is an interesting thing, or a microprocessor, a custom ASIC, for example. This showcases to your employer, whoever is really interested, that you know the full flow from A to Z. Even though you might be an expert in one specific area, it could be machine learning, tweaking, hyperparameters and all of those things. But for me, I would think maybe tackling small projects until you master the whole flow might not be the best at it, but at least you get a glimpse of the whole operation, because you're eventually going to be working with other people. So you don't want to sound like you're living in a cocoon and you don't know what the hell is happening.
absolutely, yes. I joined with this idea.
Yes, I agree with you, Amin. And I just mentioned that modeling, just try to build models as much as you can. If you want to focus on a specific part, for example, the part of modeling itself, or you can focus on the full pipeline, or just try to build different things like modeling or machine learning on production, for example, as Amin mentioned. For example, you can use TensorFlow Lite in Arduino, or you can use TensorFlow for Android, for example, and you can see the full pipeline of any project, as Amin said. Exactly. And that's final step. I will just add to what Amin said. You can deploy it and put it in somewhere like Kaggle competitions or Kaggle notebook, for example, or GitHub. It will be really nice place to upload your projects, even if they are simple, but they will understand, the interviewee will understand that you know what you're talking about. If you have something to prove, for example, in Kaggle competitions, or in GitHub repository.
Agreed.
Yeah, I'm waiting for her, actually. No, it's not me. I'm waiting for her. Yeah, I want to learn from the actual, the actual people who get their hands dirty the whole time.
Yeah, I would say that it's great to start from Kaggle competitions or participate in hackathons. That gives you a great start to know what problems are. But I would suggest for students to try to get an internship in a startup or in a company to get real data from real clients, where the data is not processed at all, that does not look like any kind of data that a model can use. So from there you get your hands dirty and clean it and try to create a model for this specific client use case, and this will give you the real idea behind what really happens in the machine learning world.
That is true. But I think the question that everyone usually asks, especially when they're at the beginning, is how should I choose my project? What type of data should I use? From where should I get the data? Because we keep telling people that, yeah, data, but in reality, even in companies, they don't give you data. They tell you to just go around and like the best use case is just web scraping it from the net. That's like the most positive outcome that you can get.
Web scraping is also very debatable, by the way. There are a lot of legal implications when you go for that.
Of course,
I,
of course.
I actually second Norsheen. So there's a huge difference between getting your data catered to you directly and between, going the ugly road of soliciting all of that and tampering with the trash and everything. But generally speaking, when you're talking about data scientists or machine learning engineers, maybe data scientists to be more, or really depends. It's not just getting the data ready for you so you can tinker around with the model. The whole pipeline, if you don't have enough manpower on your team, really requires you that you go to the extent of figuring out how you can get the data. Now, web scraping is fantastic. I love it. But again, you got to just be careful because sometimes there are legal implications, especially when you're talking about governmental website, for example.
Okay, but what do you think about starting? Like, what kind of how should one choose a project to work on? Should they figure out what they want to work on later on, like in the industry, or like how should they choose this project?
Maybe it depends. Sorry, Mohammed, go ahead. Sorry. So I want to hear you.
I think one of the great resources of getting a lot of different data sets is Google Dataset. It's just a search engine just for data sets. You can find whatever data you will have. You can, for example, you can find data for banking sector, for whatever you can think of. You can find data there. And sometimes the result will be paid data. You can pay money just to get some data, if that's extreme. But I don't recommend to pay for getting data. It's just you can use these data to build whatever project you have. And I will add just one more thing. Sorry, I will just add one more thing. Usually these websites, or for example, Google datasets or Kaggle, sources of datasets, it's really clean. So try to learn as much as possible how to clean the data, because they come just like fairy tale and a really beautiful data set.
Hey, there you go. Clean and nice. And I just use it.
Clean and nice.
The world works like that,
No, it does not work like that, but it's a good way to start.
Maybe just another point. I found that crowdsourcing is really also interesting. So I was working on a project which was a small thing that I had over the weekend. I wanted to just block all the photos that had, Eid Mubarak and all of these things. And don't get me wrong, I love those, but they were just getting too much by the end of it. So I actually had a small link where people can upload images to my Dropbox directly. And I was asking people for help. Okay, so I reached out to my aunts and my uncles as well. So if you have images, just put them through. And through Instagram, I actually got a quite nice data, a cool set of images that I can use. So I feel that crowdsourcing is also a valuable tool when people appreciate the kind of project you're working on.
When you have the people that will help you do that, I think.
My family relatives, definitely. It's like everyone that I actually blocked came into the picture now. Like, hey, I'm looking for those photos. Can you send them back?
Yeah,
I think it would be a great idea to just take the data from your WhatsApp, classify it, and then make the model learning by itself.
Maybe, next time.
It is a great idea. I agree.
Thanks. Norsheen, you were saying something, sorry?
I was saying that it's maybe like a bit easy to collect data, but I think the most difficult part is to have a labeled data, because not all the models can be trained on an unsupervised way. And I think NLP is needs a lot of labeled data to be working. So collecting the data is great, but having annotation with this data is the big difficult thing that we are still facing nowadays.
100%. Yes.
But there are a lot of research laboratories that are working on those things, and that they release their paper with their open source data. So I think this is cool, and a lot of people are working on this more and more.
Yeah, like research is trying as much as they can to try and see how they can tackle weekly supervised or unsupervised learning as much as they can. And I think people at reinforcement learning are doing an amazing job so far. So my next question comes up to, I mean, all of you have mentioned a lot, either data cleaning or outsourcing data. Like you talked about this data thinking process a lot. So what I want you to tell me is, what is a typical machine learning project workflow? And what is the thing that you believe that someone who has started, or actually even advanced people, should focus on more when they are, you know, like building these projects? ML related projects, of course. Marsha?
Yeah, so maybe as a typical like working day for an engineer is to start with the project and try to understand what the client needs from this project as an output and see what he has as data and start from there. The data could be like very small, it could be not really representative of the domain where the client is working, but let's say we start with this data, we try to clean it and try to do some data augmentation if it is possible with different techniques that are available nowadays. And when we are sure that the data is ready, next we can say like we can start to do the modeling of the neural networks. And we probably not have to start with a very complex one. Maybe start with very simple neural networks and try the training, the evaluation of the model, and see the results. If they are good, then we can try to improve those either by going back to the data or going for doing a more complex model or doing hyperparameter tuning. So it's a back and forth pipeline from the data to the model creation and evaluation.
Okay.
Yeah,
Amin?
maybe for me, yes. So for me, because I'm more product oriented, I think setting the expectations correctly from the get-go, you know, with your clients. Some clients feel that, okay, with the data that we've got, maybe we can get, you know, an accuracy of 99% maybe. But the reality is data differs. You know, you've got different levels of quality, you know, as you said, I mean, cleanliness, let's say, for the data. Also, I think online streaming, not really, or let's say online training, where, I mean, you get the ability to, you know, update your data set to keep it fresh, also is a pretty big deal. It can be a defining factor of your product. One of the really key moments in my machine learning, let's say, quote unquote, career, was when I got, so I was really, really bugged by the idea that I can't really figure out how many layers should I put, you know, how many layers should I exactly put in a neural network? Or let's say how many neurons, you know, I should put basically. So one of the people that I worked with in GTC in NVIDIA, and Hamad remembers that when we went there in the States, he just laid it down plain and simple. He said, it's a mixture of science and art as well. So you got to try, you know, trial stuff until you get it working. It's like, okay, so apparently this is just like music, you know, you put stuff, you know, on a baseline. I mean, you're not starting from scratch, of course, but until you get it really right. So for me, I mean, until this day, I really feel that it's not making sense for me. Okay, I mean, if you're a deterministic person, you feel that things should follow rules. But when you're talking about those specifics, like, okay, so maybe there's a huge chunk of art in the whole thing. You know? So
I think, I mean, I
science
agree.
is an art. The
Yes,
whole
it is an
science, I
art.
mean, all of it, practically, not just machine learning.
Yes, I think linear regression it is, or regressions it is an art. Regression analysis, يعني overall, it is an art by itself. You don't know what to put, how to put, and how to do it. This is one thing. The other thing I just want to add for your word, I mean, if you get 100% accuracy, there is something wrong within your
100%,
model.
100%. Yeah, I mean,
even 99.90 something, there is something wrong. Just redo the whole thing.
I mean, exactly.
Crazy.
Yeah, so I think as an engineer, it's very hard for me to accept the idea that there's a small margin of art, or let's say common sense maybe, on how to do things instead of just following the actual rules. but I mean, it seems to be working.
It is to be working. What I would do to start every project, because we're working in data science field, so I start by the question, or I just meet business requirement, and we just keep asking a question. For example, why this event, for example, happen? Or first, what has happened? Then why did it happen? Then can we forecast it, for example? And we put all these questions in a document, and we keep tinkering with the data, playing around with the data, see if we can answer these questions and why. But we don't answer these questions. We have more questions to ask, to be honest. Yani.
Just like my tabs on Chrome.
Yes, exactly. we keep asking until we get a satisfied answer, and then we present it to the business user and see what do they think. Sometimes, and this is the most beautiful thing about modeling, sometimes the conclusion that they have, we can we can prove it mathematically, and the model can detect these things, and sometimes it can detect more information and give more information to the business user that he didn't think of. Then usually he will go and give you more questions, and here is the cycle begin.
Oh my god, this is amazing.
Maybe there's another thing that could help like engineers have like better results, is like to have a domain expert in this field. Let's say we're working on biology and all the engineers have only software background and ML expertise and know-how, and they don't know really about the biology field. So it's really interesting to have in the team someone who studied biology, had a master's degree in that, so he interprets the results from his way of seeing. He knows what actually the parameters are defining in this specific equation, for example. And his feedback could really help the engineers to know how to tune the hyperparameters in order to get better results.
Also, maybe I feel that, mastering your tools, again, as an engineer. So a great example, if you're tinkering with TensorFlow. So TensorFlow, or let's say Keras TensorFlow 2.0, I mean, a traditional, or let's say somebody who's just started in this field would definitely go the easy route of having, your regular Keras setup, and then you have this sequential sort of way of building models. But understanding how to use the functional API, understanding how to subclass maybe down the line, really opens up a lot of space for you to experiment with different architectures, for example. So you don't have to stick to a standard, template that you just tinker with, but having different architectures that you can experiment with is also an eye-opening experience if you can go to that, level as well.
And that is an opening for my next question. So, I mean, there are so many amazing libraries, tools out there. So which one should the machine learning engineer, aspiring one, start with? And what?
Definitely not TensorFlow 1.0.
Definitely not. No.
That one gave me a headache. That one gave me a headache on planes.
Oh yeah, I agree. Especially when you're starting with it and it's your first time doing computer vision with TensorFlow 1.0. That's a disaster.
Yeah, 2.0 was really a fresh breeze. When you talk about 1.0, for the people out there in the audience, so TensorFlow 1.0 was really a lot of work that had to be done in the beginning before you actually do the modeling. So setting up the graph and everything, that might not be very trivial for people who want to just get people that want to experiment, and that's that. And I feel this is why PyTorch also had a lot of hype behind it, because people can now get everything correctly done, if they're moving away from TensorFlow 1.0. 2.0 was a nice addition, given that it was based also on Keras, the way I saw, and I feel that the community is also doing a lot of great work there.
Yes, their documentation is 1,000 times better right now. I love it. It just.
I know Mohammed has a lot of experience. Muhammad has experience with PyTorch, I believe, as well. He was trying to sway me, to get into PyTorch. And I was like, no, no.
No, I agree with them. I mean,
don't touch my religion,
I mean, the first time I got started, to be honest, I am pretty happy I started with PyTorch, because if it wasn't with PyTorch, I wouldn't have understood a lot of things, like that, like basics I needed to know before even touching TensorFlow, especially TF1.0.
Oh man.
Yes. I think you can see the end goal and then start from there. For example, if you want to be a machine learning engineer, there is different stack to learn from it. Or if you want to be a data scientist, it will be a different stack to start with. So I would say start tinkering with all these tools, different tools. So start with a bit of TensorFlow, a bit of PyTorch, a bit of Scalar. Start with sometimes with R. Then see what do you love more, and what do you like, what's better for you in your specific case. Then start going deep into it. We didn't talk about R, no, but I think R is a great tool for statistics and a bit of data science. So you can start with any.
Come help us. Come save us.
I actually started with R when I was studying,
Okay.
and yeah, I thought it was good to start from there. I mean, a lot of pre-built libraries to just use and to plot and just use pre-built models and all. But if you want to really build your model layer per layer and experience more and get your hands on the different pipelines in a project, it's better to merge to Python. And as Muhammad said, you can experience with all the packages from PyTorch, from TensorFlow, and try to see where you work better. And because it's difficult like to know everything about the full packages, but then you can choose which one you like more, and focus more on the documentation, try to implement a lot of things, have a lot of bugs, try to understand how to solve those bugs, and etc. to learn more.
Agreed. Okay, so here's my next question. I think Notion has already mentioned this, but let's take the situation where you don't have a domain knowledge expert that you can get in touch with. So how do you tackle the domain knowledge part?
That's a tricky question. Like, for example, in NLP, if you are put in a project, if you only know to speak Arabic and English, and you're put in a project where it's about French, so this is really going to be hard. It's true that the model or the pipeline would be the same roughly, but there will be like specificity for this language to know how to process the data. And when you see the prediction of the models, and it's not only about the accuracy, you need to see what are the transcriptions, for example, to see where the model is making mistakes, and you from your understanding of the language, how you can fix those mistakes by going back to the architecture of the model, for example. So if you lack like a knowledge about certain domain, either you go back for an expert from the team or try to hire an expert for this specific project, or if this is not possible, try to have like some extra courses for yourself for you to try to handle this, and maybe this will help you for later projects as well. Who knows?
I mean, I think
I actually second Norshin big time. I feel that, I mean, if you have no domain expertise, you're going to be in a very rough spot, because in the end of the day, you're trying to solve business, quote unquote, problems. And so if you don't know what you're doing, if you're making progress, if you're really going away from the goal, I mean, you have no compass, in the whole situation. So pairing up with somebody who has expertise, you might not necessarily really master, let's say, biology on your own and understand how CRISPR works in order to do good stuff, but having somebody that you can go back to and ask those questions, and maybe showing the data or the predictions that you get, and it's going to be very imperative. I feel that this is really mandatory to be, surrounded by people who know what they're doing in the business domain.
Muhammad?
I agree with you. It will be very hard, almost impossible to do it, because you have to learn this domain by yourself, and it's not working very well, I would say.
Or maybe we
So
can just wait for
usually,
AGI to come up, huh?
Or maybe you can wait for
Yeah,
AGI. Yes.
singularity, and we're all good. We can all retire then, huh?
we're supposed to be building that. Okay, so I think like the advice usually I hear a lot from experts is that it is better like in the first place to go towards the domain you have the most appeal to. Like for example, if you're interested in biology, try and apply machine learning to biology because you already have interest in that domain and you know like you can have the bandwidth to read more about it and apply machine learning to that domain. So like
I
try
think
to lean towards something that you have preferences to at least. So that it doesn't become a challenge to learn at least.
and this is interesting thing in machine learning. If you do it right, for example, you can be the best doctor that's ever have without having any knowledge in humans, or without any knowledge, any study. You can be the best one, or sometimes you can be the best football coach and you don't know nothing about football. Yes,
I don't
that is
agree.
possible.
I don't agree with this one because you know, like for example, for my
Okay.
PhD, I have
Right.
no knowledge of medicine. I have only the basics, like everything we study in high school and all of that. And because I have to interpret what my machine learning model is, you know, like saying, and I have to explain it in my papers as well. So I have to understand how that disease shows up in the data. So if I don't understand it, I can't explain it to other people. Of course, I'm not a
Yes, I agree.
doctor, but I am about to become a doctor if this keeps going.
You keep learning every day.
I also feel that's the
That's the
magic
beauty.
of teaching also. Yes, I completely agree. Also, the magic of teaching is you're inclined to actually understand how things work before you go into that area of explaining to people, and you don't want to be embarrassed that you're teaching them different, wrong things.
Agreed.
Yes, we always say that you need to be like steps further from the students to be able to teach them, because you never know what questions they are going to ask you. And if they are learning, they will be like very curious to ask a lot of questions that even maybe you didn't ask to yourself, and you'd be set in the position like, yeah, this is a great question. Why didn't I think about it? And yeah, it's fun to have this kind of questions.
I feel Norshin, you're really striking a different chord that I have. So my kids, when I get in the car, and they're 3 years now, and when they ask about stuff in life, I feel that I don't know anything. Like, how is the sky blue? Can you explain to me how those clouds move? Like, okay, how do I now explain it without embarrassing myself as a parent?
Yeah.
I remember my father was complaining about that a lot too.
It's definitely a common theme, across parents.
Okay, so here's my next two questions before we take questions from the audience. And the first one is, what resources do you consult regularly? The second
Good
one
question.
is, are certificates valuable to get a job in the field? You can choose to answer both of them or only one of them.
Okay, let's hear from Hamid maybe before we circle around.
Sure, Mohammed. Or you have been busted? I think he has internet issues.
I think his AI took over, maybe.
I don't think StreamYard's handled that right now.
See, the machines are coming for us, guys. We have to be very careful, huh? Before we're saying. Okay, maybe Norshin or me, so we can kill time.
Yeah, okay. So for the first question, what are the resources that we could be using? I mean, in the internet, there are a lot of resources, and maybe you will have a lot of questions, and most probably you will find your answers somewhere over there. So an important resource I would say is all the archive. So a lot of research papers are being released like weekly or even daily, and you will find the details behind the research of this specific model. And a lot of papers are always released with their code. So it's very interesting to go from the coding part to going back to the research part in order to see how this idea, which was just a paragraph, was translated into a code that the machine understands. So I think this is a great beginning. And so maybe we continue this question and go to the second one. Maybe it's better.
As you'd like. Amin?
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of the archive website. I mean, as if you're a researcher, you will definitely go there a lot. You know, you want to understand new ideas, you want to know how they're implemented and all these things. But I also feel that kaggle.com is a great resource. You know, you get that sense of community and how things work, you know, line by line. And you can actually see the metrics, how they pan out, if things are better than the other stuff as well. I'm a big fan of OpenAI's blog also, and DeepMind's blog also. They're very eye-opening, especially that they're a leader in that area. I honestly felt that books were really interesting for me. So when I read the book Deep Learning with Python by Francois Chalot, the guy who wrote Actually Occurs, it was extremely eye-opening for me. The way it clearly talks about, you know, what you're going to get with machine learning, the mysteries being demystified, that, okay, so everything can be solved with deep learning, which is a myth. I mean, for me, that was very cool. So reading books about new architectures like transformers and all these things is very important to widen the horizon. So it's not just code, but understanding how architectures, how people come up with architectures, because architectures are just, you know, new ideas, you know, coming into a tangible format instead of just, you know, working on getting your next power horse and just training with it.
Agreed. So I have one question specifically for you. So from a business setting, like, I mean, all of us read all about these technical things, but I do think we should have a little bit of business acumen. So how can we develop that? Like, what kind of resources you advise people to go through?
I think getting realistic is really important. So for example, when we go to a client and we see a plethora of those, we went to manufacturing houses and these people have the budget. Now, this is where it gets very hard for a business individual, because also in the end of the day, you want to have financial gain. You're coming in for a profit. I mean, you're not doing NGO's work, but at the same time, you want to be very realistic of what you're going to deliver to the client. And at the same time, you don't want it to be an ugly experience for you. Because believe me when I tell you that there's a lot of toxic relationships that are built when you're dealing with customers. Not everything works out. And so having that transparency, that credibility is really important from the get-go. So maybe sign an NDA, get to know how their systems work, because some expectations are just way too far. I mean, if you don't have a data lake and you're expected to do some BI craze, I mean, that is not going to work. And I've seen it even with government projects in Bahrain. So when we go to our clients, some of them want to have these big rooms with a lot of, you know, BI stuff happening. But if you don't have, you know, if you work with Excel, strictly Excel, no database, no data layer, I mean, you're just way too behind. I mean, there's a lot of work that you have to do. So getting the expectations there, being very realistic with your clients is the best way. Otherwise, you're going to have a nightmare, basically.
All right. Thank you. Mohammed?
Pleasure.
You are cutting. I think he's still hacked.
No, I think he's now communicating using Morse code. You know, I think we evolved to that. Like, I can hear it. Maybe Mohammed is gonna kill me the second we're done with this. He's in Bahrain also.
Okay, let's wait for him until he comes back and answer the second question, if you don't mind, of course.
Sure.
Yeah,
That works.
just maybe another resource is that is a little bit underestimated is the Twitter. I think that communicating, getting in contact with all the people that are working in this field is really great, and you can see all the news from there. So getting into groups, into following people that are in this domain is also a great thing to do. So for the second question, which was about is like having the courses, important thing.
Certificate.
Certifications.
Are certificates valuable to get a job in the field? Like,
I
do
think
they have some kind of value?
I think first it has a value for the person itself. So if he like commit to have a course with like 6 months or 3 months to have this final certificate, it will be definitely valuable for him, as he will be learning in a pace that will get into a lot of details and a lot of certifications at projects where you can spend hours debugging and learning. And then from the side of the recruiter, this will show your interest in the field. So you're going to do or search for certifications that are interesting for the field you are working on. So not just having certification for general AI or introduction to AI. Maybe if you are applying for a position that needs an expertise in computer vision, it's really valuable to see in your CV that you actually have a certification in this field.
Muhammad, because he has been cutting the whole time. Please go ahead.
How about now?
Muhammad, we were saying really good
Inshallah,
things about you, Muhammad. We were saying really good stuff about you, believe me.
I'm sure, you're saying good things. I'm sure. Just 5 minutes and I'll be in your home.
What did I tell you guys? What did I tell you?
Okay, so for the certification, I think it will be valuable as you said, for yourself, just for you to learn more, and it will keep you motivated to learn more. It's just like a reward. You can see it as reinforcement learning. It will give you a reward on what you did, what you learned, what you did before. Then you can apply these things from the certification to the real world exam. I think it's valuable, not for the jobs, but for yourself.
Yes, thank you. I think
And
you're right. Like,
it doesn't need to be very complex certificate, like something like very complex. It just can be a certificate from, for example, Coursera. Coursera is a great platform, and you can have your certificate and you can put it, for example, and show to the people via LinkedIn or Twitter or your CV.
definitely. So, because you have been cutting before, I'm going to go back to the first question in your case.
Okay, tell me.
Do you have any great resources you would like to recommend to our attendees?
Yes, of course. I really like data science, toward data science. It's really hands-on, have a lot of article, has a lot of code, and it will explain every bit of code to you so you can learn more. Also, DeepMind have a blog, and it's really cool blog. I don't know if you just see it before. It's really cool. It will give you cutting edge ideas and project they are working on, and it's really cool.
Yeah, and Amin recommended that just now.
Oh, I will definitely see you.
I still didn't have dinner, man. There's an open invitation.
yes. Let's have a dinner.
I think we forgot another important resource. It's a simple one. It's YouTube. I think that YouTube is really simplifying things. I mean, there are a lot of interesting YouTube channels where they go and explain the code line by line. I mean, it's not always easy to understand your code, but when you see someone that's explaining it, even in your local language, it could be someone explaining in Tunisian dialect, for example, this gives you the idea that this is actually easy to understand and that you can as well understand this thing. So YouTube is definitely another resource to have.
I heard a great resource on YouTube and great channel YouTube called Amin Tajer. Did you know about it?
Who's that? Who are we talking about?
He's a really nice guy. And he can teach you a lot about AI.
For me personally, I think the mixture of artificial intelligence, or let's say machine learning, specifically with CPU design, has been a great passion of mine. The last 2 years, I got myself occupied by understanding how to build CPUs, which was the ultimate passion of mine. And I get to understand how TPUs work on the inside, and how those things. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity for us because we come from different backgrounds as engineers and we're passionate about machine learning, unlike you, of course, Sarah. And so, you know, mixing and getting those things to marry themselves is a fantastic thing.
I agree. I mean, I'm not a fan of CPUs and GPUs. I'm not very much a fan of these things, but I do agree that mixing, you know, like what you like with machine learning is the best route to excel in it, actually.
100%.
So I have some questions from the attendees. I will be taking some. And the first interesting one I came up through is, what is the salary of a beginner in machine learning? Like the first salary?
I think Norshin would know, you know, she lives among those people.
Could you reformulate the question?
Yes. This is an embarrassing question. What is the beginner salary in machine learning?
Like, it really depends on the company and on the country also. So so it depends. We have some CEOs
give us a
here
range.
also, so
Give us
maybe
a
they can answer the question.
I'm not hiring, guys. I barely pay myself.
I only know my salary, so maybe someone who has a company would have a wider knowledge about this.
So I heard that Netflix, for example, pays its machine learning engineers between 200K per year to 300K, and this is really a different set of a new league for those guys, of course, because their product really depends on it. But from what I heard, they can range between 120 to 160, depending on where you go, as far as I know. But I could be wrong.
Well, I would like to know how much they pay in the Arabic world, if you have an idea, because
if it exists,
where all of us are. But in machine learning, they pay you the typical. In Morocco, they pay you the typical salary of an engineer. That's it. There is no, there's no machine learning software. There is nothing like that. They just pay you the typical salary.
Yeah, maybe also in this part of the world, in Bahrain, for example, we don't have that literacy yet. So we're still, struggling when it comes to having a proper structure for these jobs. Also, I think the tech jobs in general have a lot of, work to be done in this area. Yeah, especially if you're a system engineer or an architect. I mean, you suffer getting yourself allocated.
Agreed. So is anyone here from Bahrain? Because someone asked the question of, in what sector industry is AI growing in Bahrain?
So Mohammed and I are from Bahrain, so Mohammed, maybe you want to start.
Oh, so just go ahead.
I would say in Bahrain, I would say data science. It's a great way. If you focus on data science in Bahrain, it will be really great, and data engineering, of course, because we need to build these pipelines for data, for example, for a data lake, for a data warehouse, and then we can have your advanced model and forecast your data and all these stuff. So I would say data engineering and data science, it is growing.
In my opinion, also in Bahrain, the problem is, we get very excited about the tech. However, I mean, we still have a lot of work to do. For example, as Mohammed said, so machine learning is like the cherry on top of the cake. So it assumes that you have your data infrastructure up and running. But the reality is, if you go to government institutions, a lot of them don't have your typical, let's say, database setup. They don't have OLTP, OLAP, and all of these things laid down. So for you to be doing actual machine learning work, there's a lot of heads-up work that you have to do with them, and sometimes that might not be very fruitful. But in our experience in InfiniteWare, for example, we've worked with different government entities, and it's really a very it's a great opportunity commercially. There's a lot of funds to be tapped in that area, and there's a lot of value for them as well, given that they have access to the data and they have years of data as well. So there's no shortage when it comes to that thing. However, data quality is a pretty big deal also from what we've seen.
Definitely. I mean, like I have been training models, like several models, because of my PhD. And when my data is bad, it's bad. Like all the models fail. When it's good,
Garbage
all
in,
the
garbage
models
out.
are
Yeah.
excellent. I mean, so data quality is very important. That's the thing I can tell you from my research. So I have one last question for you, and we will wrap up the session. So someone asked if you could recommend some important books in machine learning. I will reformulate the question to you, giving us your most favorite books. Or just one. No one wants to go for that?
Pick somebody, Sarah.
Okay. So, Norshan, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a lot of books. I would say hands-on machine learning for a lot of people that started with this one. It goes a lot of understanding of with some great examples. And there's one for NLP that I forgot the name, but I should remember the name. But it was also a good one. But it really don't tackles the latest advances in NLP, but it stops at the, let's say, LSTM's models. But it's a great start to start from there. I mean, if you understand those neural networks, it will be easier for you to pack all the things that are coming daily.
Nice suggestion. Mohammed?
I would say I would say Deep Learning Visualized. It's a great book. It's really simple and it's explaining neural network in a very visualized way. You can see the neurons and what is inside these neurons. We used to يعني know that it's a black box, black box, but Deep Learning Visualized will show you how they are working, and you will know how these neurons interact with each other. For example, it's really basic, does not cover advanced topic like let's say transformer or BERT or all these complex model, but it's a really good head start, let's say.
Yeah, I think it's a recently released book, right?
Yes.
Thank you for the recommendation. So, I mean,
Yeah, for me, I think one book that really made a huge mark was Deep Learning with Python, as I said, by Francois Scheller. A great book. I mean, some like the guy who created Keras is basically getting your hand into this area. The second book, I wouldn't say a great book for beginners, but it's pretty interesting to really get hands-on with that book at this stage. If you're interested in NLP, NLP is really big, and transformers are playing a huge part in defining the industry so far. So there's this book, Transformers, by the same guy, I believe, who's a co-founder in Hugging Face, I believe, Hugging Face. And it's pretty interesting to see. I mean, I read a few chapters in the beginning, and I love it so far. I wish that I really read that book before I started Transformers.
All right. So thank you very much for your time, for the amazing advice, and for answering all of those questions. Any last thoughts before we wrap up?
I would say keep tinkering and keep building models and have fun with your journey.
Great advice.
Yeah, I would say find what you love the most and try to apply machine learning for this.
I would say build useful stuff.
Best to last, right? Okay. Thank you very much, guys, for your time. And thanks for the attendees for staying with us and for all your sorts of questions. And have a great day.
See you guys. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.
See ya.